In 2008, a woman in Harare walked into a bakery with a backpack. Not a purse, not a wallet, a backpack, because that's how much cash you needed to buy a single loaf of bread. The number printed on the note she handed over had 23 zeros behind it. And the baker almost didn't accept it because by the time she walked home, it might not be worth anything at all. This is a story about money, or at least that's what it looks like from the outside. To understand what happened in Zimbabwe, you have to understand what Zimbabwe was. In 1980, it gained independence. The land was fertile, the infrastructure was functional, the currency was strong. One Zimbabwean dollar could buy more than one American dollar. This was a country with a real future. Economists noticed it. Investors noticed it. The world was watching. And then, slowly, things began to change. By the late 1990s, the government under Robert Mugabe began seizing land from white commercial farmers and redistributing it. The intention was to correct the deep injustice of colonial land ownership, but the execution was catastrophic. The farmers who knew how to work the land were gone. Agricultural output collapsed. Food that Zimbabwe used to export, it could no longer grow enough to feed itself. The economy started bleeding, and the government made a decision that, on paper, seemed almost logical. They printed more money. It should have worked. That's the thing. On a surface level, if people don't have enough money, give them more money. Simple, direct, obvious. But reality had other plans. When you flood a system with currency, each individual note becomes worth less. Basic economics. Except what happened in Zimbabwe wasn't basic. It was something closer to a horror story written in numbers. In 2001, inflation was at 112%. Painful, but survivable. By 2003, it had crossed 600%. By 2007, it passed 66,000%. And then, it stopped making sense entirely. In November 2008, Zimbabwe's monthly inflation rate hit 79.6 billion %. Prices were doubling every 24 hours, sometimes faster. A meal that cost $100 at breakfast cost $200 by dinner. People started buying anything, furniture, livestock, bottles of cooking oil, not because they needed it, but because physical objects held their value longer than the paper in their pockets. Money was rotting faster than food. But here's what the numbers don't tell you. Think about what it actually felt like. You wake up, you have savings, your entire life's work represented in a number in a bank account. You go to sleep, you wake up, and that number, it's the same. Technically. But it buys half of what it bought yesterday. You didn't spend it. You didn't lose it. No one stole it. It just evaporated. How do you explain that to your children? How do you make sense of a world where working harder, saving more, being more disciplined, none of it matters? Because the value is leaking out of the system faster than you can pour it in. This is the part almost nobody talks about. Hyperinflation doesn't just destroy economies, it destroys something deeper. It destroys the story. Because money has always been a story, not a metaphor. A literal collective story, a shared agreement, a fiction that works only because enough people believe in it simultaneously. A dollar bill is a piece of cotton and linen. It has no inherent value. You cannot eat it. You cannot build shelter from it. What gives it power is nothing more and nothing less than the belief of millions of people agreeing, right now, that it matters. And in Zimbabwe, that belief started to die. First slowly, then all at once. People began abandoning the Zimbabwean dollar in daily life. They switched to barter. They used foreign currency on the black market. They paid in South African rand, in US dollars, in anything that held meaning outside Zimbabwe's borders. The government printed higher and higher denominations, trying to keep up. A $10 note, a $100 note, a $100 trillion note, the largest denomination ever produced by any government in human history. Printed, issued, and rendered worthless within weeks. At some point, the central bank gave up counting. They literally stopped publishing inflation statistics because the numbers had become absurd. And this is where something strange happened. Amid total economic collapse, life continued. Not comfortably, not safely, but it continued. People still went to work, markets still opened, children still went to school. Human beings are astonishing in their ability to adapt, to find workarounds, to create informal systems, to keep going when the official structures fail them completely. But here's the psychological question nobody asks about that resilience. What does it cost? When the system fails and you survive anyway, you learn something about the system you can never unlearn. You see behind the curtain. You understand in your body, not just your mind, that the structures you trusted were always just agreements, collective performances. And the moment enough people stopped performing, they collapsed. What would you have done if your savings vanished overnight, not through theft or disaster, but through the slow erosion of belief? How long before your own faith in the system broke? How many of us are closer to that edge than we think? In 2009, Zimbabwe made a drastic decision. They abandoned their own currency entirely. The Zimbabwean dollar was demonetized, officially declared worthless. The government switched to a basket of foreign currencies, US dollars, euros, South African rand. And remarkably, almost immediately, hyperinflation stopped. Shelves and shops began to refill, prices stabilized. The crisis ended not because anything physically changed. The same land, the same people, the same buildings. What changed was the story. A new currency carried new belief. Borrowed belief, technically, belief that belonged to other countries, other economies, other governments. Zimbabwe essentially said, we can no longer sustain our own collective agreement, so we will borrow yours. And it worked. Think about that for a moment. Really think about it. An economy of millions of people was destroyed and then partially rebuilt, not through physical reconstruction, not through discovery of new resources, but through a shift in collective belief. The crisis was a crisis of faith. The recovery was an act of faith. Different stories, told by the same human minds, producing completely different material realities. We talk about Zimbabwe as an economic case study, as a failure of governance, as a warning about fiscal irresponsibility. And it is all of those things, but it's also something else. It's a mirror, because every currency on earth operates on the same foundation. Every economy, every financial system. The US dollar is trusted not because there is gold locked in a vault somewhere backing every note. That system ended in 1971. The dollar is trusted because the United States government says it is, and enough people around the world believe them. That's it. That's the entire architecture of global finance. Belief, agreement, collective performance, maintained simultaneously by billions of strangers who have never met each other and never will. Zimbabwe didn't discover a flaw in their system. They exposed a feature of every system. The only difference between a functioning currency and a collapsed one is the confidence of the people holding it. And confidence is not a physical object. You cannot store it. You cannot manufacture it. You can only cultivate it slowly over decades and lose it in an instant. There's a Zimbabwean woman named Anna. Her story documented by journalists covering the collapse, who kept a $100 trillion note long after it became worthless. She kept it in a frame on her wall, not as a joke, not as a curiosity, as a reminder. She said, "This is what happens when people stop believing." She didn't mean it as a lesson about economics. She meant it as a lesson about everything, about governments, about institutions, about marriages, communities, nations, about any structure built not from stone or steel, but from the agreements of human minds, which, if you look closely, is almost every structure that matters. The law is an agreement. Democracy is an agreement. Property rights are an agreement. Human rights, the idea that you deserve dignity simply by existing, that is the most radical agreement of all, one that took centuries to build and has collapsed in specific places, in specific moments throughout history, and always for the same reason. Enough people stopped believing. So what does Zimbabwe teach us? Not just about inflation, not just about government policy. It teaches us that civilization is not a building. It's not infrastructure or institutions or armies. Civilization is a story we tell each other every single day, in the way we use money, follow laws, trust strangers, show up to work, respect agreements we could easily break. And the story works until it doesn't. Until enough people, for enough reasons, stop telling it at the same time. Zimbabwe didn't collapse because of money. It collapsed because of trust. And trust, once broken its scale, doesn't obey the laws of economics. It obeys something older, something deeper, something that was true long before the first coin was ever minted. We are not rational actors in a financial system. We are storytellers, terrified of the silence that comes when the story ends. The $100 trillion note didn't fail because of mathematics. It failed because, one morning, enough people looked at it and felt nothing. And in that moment of collective doubt, an entire reality dissolved. Which means the reality you're living in right now is held together by the same invisible thread. You just haven't noticed it yet.